The Legal Advocacy and Education Commission. I joined the LAEC because I understand the need for change. I understand that criminal justice reform impacts everyone, even if you think that it doesn't. Even if you have not experienced it firsthand or experienced it within the immediate family, you experience it within the community and the impact that it has in the community and the impact that it has on the United States as a whole. I believe that the criminal justice system needs to go back to the reason why it was created. It was created for justice. It wasn't created to hand out felonies and to put people in prison. The United States has the highest incarceration rate amongst every country in the world. If that's not an identifiable problem, I don't know what is. So we really need to reevaluate where the criminal justice system has gone and pull it back to where it should be. The first-time offender program is such an essential program and such an important program. So we are going to be able to assist first-time offenders that have no clue what is happening to them, have no clue what to do, and have no clue about the collateral consequences that taking a plea deal with a felony can have on them. The amount of people that receive felonies in the United States to date is about 19 million. What that means is that there's 19 million people, or 8.1 roughly, of the United States population that can no longer hold certain jobs. This equates to about $65 billion a year in GDP. This not only affects a person, this not only affects, it's not about one person, it's about all of us. It's about our entire economy. It's about every one of us. It's about our communities. I believe that the first-time offender program is really going to help stop that revolving door of the criminal justice system and of the district attorney's office handing out felonies left and right. The Legal Advocacy and Education Commission has many values. Amongst one of them is transparency. Transparency in the LAEC is very important to us, not only because it's what is right to do, but also because of all of the controversy surrounding other nonprofit organizations and what they do with their money. We will always be transparent. We will always be informative of where the donations go. We will keep trackers. We will send newsletters. We will make sure we are abiding by all regulatory laws, so that our donors and our stakeholders understand that transparency, being one of our values, is probably the most important one of all. We are definitely not against law enforcement or against the prosecutor's office. We want to partner with them. We want to make sure that we are on the same page with everyone and we are able to reach out to the district attorney's office, partner with them, have events with them, support them, as well as we would want them to support us. We are not against law enforcement officers. We are against those who are not doing the right thing. I think the LAC is going to change the world, not only an individual's world, but our entire world. We're hoping to have an LAC representative in every courthouse in the United States so that people can take alternate paths with their lives, better paths. One mistake should not dictate an entire person's life. Everyone deserves a second chance. If anyone's interested in the LAEC, they could visit our website, www.thelaec.org. We're on all social medias, and if anyone wants to directly reach us, they can send us an email to info@thelaec.org.
Welcome, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that video. This event is sponsored by the Legal Advocacy and Education Commission. And as mentioned, we conduct safety assessments to address police accountability and partner with other organizations or offices that align with our values. Today, we have two amazing practicing attorneys, Zoe Aron, our criminal defense attorney, who is practicing currently in West Hollywood, and Lisa Pyle, who is a former prosecutor currently practicing in Washington, D.C. Welcome, both of you. Thank you for making the time and joining us. And we will start with our initial reflection statement. A deal is a victory for an attorney. Lisa.
Sorry, did you want me to go first? Danielle?
Yeah, feel free to, I can repeat it if you would like me to. A deal
Sure.
is a victory for an attorney.
Well, I think that really depends on the circumstance. I think it's a case-by-case basis. I think that sometimes it's a victory for everyone. Plea deals are definitely more efficient than going to trial. Obviously, you don't necessarily have all of the information on what the case is because you usually don't go through the discovery process once that starts. I mean, you can still always, there are plea deals up to the minute before trial that I've experienced, but a lot of times, the deals are negotiated before all of the evidence is out and everyone kind of knows the strength or weaknesses of the case. So not always. And I think sometimes, defendants don't get the proper counseling and don't understand everything well enough to make that decision, even though they have an attorney and they have a right to an attorney, as they should. They may not fully understand the consequences of the plea deal that they're taking, and they don't have the benefit of a jury by trial, which is a constitutional right, of course. But I do think it can be beneficial. Sometimes, a plea deal, they'll get a better deal than they would if they gone to trial, or even maybe that they deserve, just because of the volume of cases that a lot of offices have. I think plea deals are a necessity, but not necessarily a victory all the time.
So I agree with you for the most part. I think it depends on the circumstance. I think a deal can definitely be a victory for a criminal defense attorney. For the most part, as a defense attorney, a victory for me is whatever my client is happy with. So there are lots of circumstances in which my client is extremely happy with the deal. Different clients, different criminal defendants, they want different things. Some people want, to get rid of a bunch of their charges and just have one charge left. Some people want to have no jail time and don't care about what charges they end up being convicted of. Some people, want their case to be closed as soon as possible. Different people want different things. And so you have to look at each case from a case-by-case basis pretty much. And, some things would be a victory in one case and it wouldn't be a victory in another. So as a defense attorney, the most important thing for me is just to sort of ensure that whatever the best possible outcome that's present is the one that I'm able to secure for my client. And in a lot of circumstances, that actually is a deal. I have sort of a unique perspective. I used to be a public defender and now I'm a private attorney. So I understand things from both points of view. Public defenders, there is sort of more of an incentive, I guess, at times to try to get deals for your clients just because you have a huge caseload. And, the criminal justice system is extremely backed up. It's extremely slow. And a deal is oftentimes the quickest way to resolve a case. And a lot of times people care about resolving their case quickly. So I think a deal can truly be a victory for an attorney. I don't think you can say it's always a victory for an attorney because you have to look at what each client wants and what each criminal defendant is sort of looking to get out of the position that they're currently in. But a deal, ideally a deal is something that benefits everyone. And sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But a deal can be a great thing.
We have another question coming up next, and that will be, in your opinion, do you think our current criminal justice system works in a fair manner and yields accurate outcomes? Excuse me.
Well, I don't think it's perfect, obviously. It's an imperfect system. However, I do think in many ways it has improved in that there's more there's more accountability in the sense of body camera footage from police officers. Interrogations are usually videotaped, if not always now. So a lot of things like that, have moved things with more media attention on the problems with especially marginalized communities, with police brutality. All of those kinds of things I think are more at the forefront of people's thoughts, and there's more focus on that. When I was a district attorney, I did work in the rackets division for a while. We prosecuted police officers who were corrupt. The IAB, which is the police section that investigates their officers, isn't necessarily there's that whole like blue shield of silence, blue wall of silence, where they protect each other, and the IAB is supposed to do their job and look into these things. And I don't know that was always done, to the extent that it should have been done. And I think now, because of cameras being everywhere, body cameras on the police officers, there's more accountability, which makes, in that sense, the justice system is a little bit more fair and more transparent. There are checks and balances that I don't know that everyone is aware of. Throughout, you have the law enforcement who makes the arrest. The DA's office, we don't select who we prosecute. The law enforcement officer brings them to us. Then we have DAs who are reviewing the events that occurred. We talk to the victims if there are victims. We go over the evidence. We draft up the charging document. There's a judge who then gets involved for arraignments. There's the defense attorney. So there's a lot of parties and there's a lot of oversight. And I think that that can lead to more fair outcomes because there's a lot of different people that are involved in the process. It's not like this one person has all the power. A lot of times, people have this perception that the DA kind of holds all the cards, and that is true to some extent, but there's a lot of oversight, and judges have to be on board with things. The defendants have a attorney representing them. We're bound by ethics rules, Brady obligations, of course, turning over exculpatory information. There are ethics rules that we abide by, and the prosecutor's role really is not to defend the victim or lock people up, even though that is sometimes the perception. It's really to seek justice and the truth. I don't think anybody wants to put an innocent person in jail. I know I didn't, and that was always my main concern, more than getting a conviction. And so, there's always going to be, bad attorneys. There's bad cops. There's bad defense attorneys. There's bad prosecutors. There's bad law enforcement officers. There's bad judges. There's bad people, but the majority, I think, are good and want to do right by their client or by the victim. And everybody wants the same result, which is the right person to be punished for the crime. And so, it's not perfect, but I think the system is improving despite how it may appear, because I think there's more focus on the problems. But I do think there is more transparency, and it's an imperfect but a good system.
So I think I have a different opinion. I will start by saying I do agree with Lisa in the sense that things have gotten better in terms of body camera footage and holding officers accountable. I will say as a defense attorney, and I'm sure she has a similar experience, I'll still watch body camera footage, and I cannot believe that some of these officers did these things or said certain things knowing that they have cameras on. So I can't even imagine what they did when there were no cameras. I do think that there has been, sort of an increase in accountability as far as that, but I don't think it's anywhere near the point where the justice system is now able to be seen as yielding fair results. Especially as a former public defender, I would tell my clients all the time, life isn't fair, because people seek this desire for fairness and they think that when they are in a courtroom that they are going to be judged fairly. And unfortunately, in my opinion, there is no fairness in the criminal justice system. You have defendants who have no money, they have no resources, they may be of a certain skin color, and they get treated a different way just because of that. I can guarantee that my clients, when I was a public defender, were treated differently than Donald Trump is going to be now that he was indicted on criminal charges, just because of who he is. Obviously, his skin color, his money, things like that. I think that, there's been a lot of instances in which reports come out where there are two people that are similarly situated in terms of their crimes, similar criminal histories, similar, everything, except when it comes to getting sentenced, one of them is white, one of them is black. The guy who is white gets a much lesser sentence than the guy who is black, simply because of, who knows, biases that people have, unconscious things that go on in the mind of the judge or the prosecutor or the defense attorney. Different things happen in which people who should be treated one way do not get treated that way. So I really think that the criminal justice system does not yield fair results by any means. I think that discretion that's in the prosecutor's hands and discretion that's in the judge's hands when it comes to sentencing can lead to a lot of unfairness. And it's just kind of one of those things that if you're in the criminal justice system, you sort of have to accept. I hate that I have to tell my clients that, but it really is the way that things are. Also, if you have, for example, situations where it's like a domestic violence case and the defendant is a male versus a female, that can change, the outcome of the case, even if the actual crime that took place was the same exact crime. A man in a domestic violence situation is probably going to get judged more harshly than a woman in a domestic violence situation who's perpetrating the crime. So I think that the criminal justice system is not fair at all. Do I think it yields accurate results? Potentially. I think, as Lisa said, there is a lot of safeguards built into the system. Obviously, the system was founded on, innocent until proven guilty, and that in order to be proven guilty, there needs to be sufficient evidence to overcome these certain burdens that have been placed in the legal system. But I think that even though we sit here and we say people are innocent until proven guilty, that's not the way that society treats them. That's not the way that the courts treat them. That's not the way that people get treated at all. And I think that, in theory, it might get accurate results, but in reality, there's just so much mess that goes on that we don't really get an accurate result. And even if we do get an accurate result, I don't necessarily agree that the way that our system is set up right now, that accurate result is a good result. I think that there's a lot that can be done to the criminal justice system, and I believe we're going to get into that in a little bit, that could yield better results. So even if they're accurate in the sense of this person committed the crime and now this person is found guilty, I think there's a lot that can sort of be talked about in terms of whether that's a good result, regardless of whether it's truly accurate.
Great. Those are great answers. Zoe, you had a good point. Now we're jumping to improvements. So from both sides, what are some improvements to the criminal justice system that you would like to see implemented?
Well, as we already talked about, I think accountability in law enforcement is where it starts, because that's how the cases come to the DA's office and come to the criminal justice system. So that, of course, is necessary. I definitely think that decriminalizing certain things like drug offenses is something that I've always been a proponent of. And I think crimes like that, which are, really flooding our justice system, making cases that are more serious, that, like rapes and murders and sex abuse and things that I think really should be gone through the system and given the proper attention. There just isn't, there's such a burden on the system because of so many drug cases and so many victimless crimes like that. That I think, that would definitely improve the system, because it wouldn't be so backlogged. When I was a prosecutor in the Bronx, which is in New York, which is a very high crime area, I was carrying a caseload at sometimes of 160 cases when I was handling there's just no way that you can give each case the proper attention when you have a caseload like that. We would work nights. We had to do night arraignments. The system, obviously this is a very high crime area, but there's, a lot of cities like that. And especially in those areas, you just can't, on the other side, most of them had legal aid or, Bronx public defenders, represented a lot of them, and they had similar caseload. So, it's just, and the judges are overwhelmed, and, a lot of it was just trying to get rid of these cases at arraignments, and maybe the defendants do get better deals, but I don't know that they should necessarily be there in the first place. If, you have somebody smoking a joint on the street, is that really worth putting them through a system? That I think would make a big improvement in all areas, because when you take those cases out, those lower level crimes that are, really victimless crimes, or maybe they should be getting treatment, drug treatment, instead of being, put in the system and put in jail for things like that. So if you decriminalized a lot of the drug cases, there'd just be more, there'd be a better system in place and more resources dedicated to the cases that needed it, and taking a less punitive approach for those types of cases, these nonviolent offenses, focusing on treatment versus incarceration in those types of cases. I think too, focusing a lot more on the root cause of crimes like poverty and mental illness and gun laws, obviously, and prevention, versus just this real punitive approach that our country has to crimes. I think that would really improve things. I know not everybody agrees with me, especially on my side of the table in the courtroom. But I personally feel like that a big part of the problem is that it's just too big, and there's just too much volume, too much burden, not enough resources, and so it just trickles down to everybody and affects everybody. And I think that would be a huge improvement to the justice system and make things a little bit more fair, because people that can afford a private attorney, they're not carrying the caseloads that the public defenders are carrying, and they can really get the attention that their case deserves, and then a better outcome. So there is really not one system. Like Zoe was saying, it's not a fair system based potentially on race, definitely on socioeconomic status. If you can pay for a high-power attorney, I guarantee you're getting a different outcome. I would see judges, when the private attorneys came in, they would call their cases first, even though they just like saunter in their nice suit. And the public defender, they're like, oh, you're here all day, you have cases all day. And they would just let them go first, and they would just get treated completely different. And it was really kind of heartbreaking to see, because you become friends. I don't know if this was the case with you, Zoe, when you were a public defender, but, you get to know the public defenders. You're in court with them all day. The prosecutors, the public defenders become friendly. We're colleagues to some degree, even though we're adversaries to some degree as well. And we would talk about it and just how overwhelmed we all were. And I think a lot of that was because of these nonviolent offenses that were being prosecuted that really shouldn't be.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, Lisa. I think that that's totally true. And it's refreshing to hear a prosecutor who has that point of view. I think, I agree completely with what you said, but just to sort of say some other things from my point of view. I think one thing that I have a huge problem with, and I know a lot of people who have been in the public defense world have a problem with, is the difference between the amount of money that the government provides to prosecutors' offices than the amount of money that they provide to public defenders. I don't know the exact numbers offhand, but it's something like in a bunch of states, they make like 10%, the budget for the prosecutor's office is like 10 times higher than the budget for the public defender's office. And I think that that's a huge problem. And I think that having governments in the legislature give more money to public defense would make a lot of difference in the criminal justice system. But I think that that's something that's extremely hard to get the legislature on board with, because from their point of view, I guess public defenders just defend criminals and nobody really cares about the criminals, especially the criminals who have no money. So I think that that would be a huge improvement if public defense could get more funding in America. I think it would make a more even playing field, and it would also help the burden on many public defenders who are extremely overworked. The prosecutors, I know that they're overworked as well, but they at least have somewhat of a team. They have the police, getting cases for them, bringing them cases, and stuff like that. Whereas the public defenders, it's sort of just on us to figure out what's going on in all these cases and try to find a way out of it. So I think that if there was more money in the budget for public defenders, the system would get a little bit better as a whole. I also think another topic that I like to speak about, and I think would improve the criminal justice system as a whole, would be the issue of cash bond. I know this is like a hot topic in a bunch of places right now, and some states are getting rid of it, and it's a huge issue because people are, so when somebody gets arrested and they go to jail, before they are found guilty, before they have any type of anything with the court system, they have to be held in jail. And then some individuals will receive a certain bond amount, some will not. And if you can afford to pay your bond, you can get out of jail and live your life while you're waiting trial on the outside. Versus if you cannot afford to pay your bond, you have to stay in custody until it comes time to litigate your case. And it's a huge problem because people are being kept in jail when they're innocent. People are being kept in jail while they're supposed to be helping their attorney fight their case. And it leads to even more inequity in the law, and more inequity in the criminal justice system, and sort of keeps the people who can't afford to pay a bond, keeps them in jail for no reason other than the fact that they simply cannot pay a bond. And it allows a lot of people to get taken advantage of because they sort of take the first deal that's going to allow them to get out of jail. And had they not been in jail all this time, they probably wouldn't have taken that deal. The cash bond system, in my opinion, single-handedly has nothing to do with anything except how much money someone has. And I just think that that's a huge problem. The issue is, what are alternatives to that? I think that's sort of the bigger issue. You know, it's easy to point out problems all day long, but how do we solve them? That's sort of a harder question. I think certain states have tried to figure out things, and you know, it's constantly being, you know, spoken about and discussed in different places. But I think the cash bail system needs to be reformed in some way. I also think, as Lisa said, just the public mindset in America, we are so focused on incarceration and we are so focused on locking people up, and have this belief in Americans' minds that if you lock someone up, it's going to fix the problem, when in fact it doesn't. I would argue it makes things worse. I think Lisa was super on point when she said that our country needs to focus more on the root of the problem, and then we'll really solve these issues. Paying attention to marginalized communities, giving community centers, having more opportunities for children and daycares and things like that for cheaper, and funding mental health facilities. Mental health is a big thing. I know in a lot of states, the biggest mental health provider is the jails. And that's a problem because the jails don't really provide mental health treatment. And a lot of people that are getting locked up and a lot of people that are getting arrested for crimes have some sort of mental health issue. And they've never realized that, they've never had an opportunity to treat it. They've never been in a situation where they were able to sort of look at what's going on and try to prevent certain things from happening. So I think prevention is something that needs to be focused on, but I have sort of a radical view. I believe that a lot of governments don't want to focus on prevention because a lot of people in power can benefit off of keeping marginalized communities down. So I feel like there's a lot that can be done that the government maybe purposely isn't doing because they don't want to fix these things. I think it's a lot of people in society get some type of benefits from being able to lock up others or see other people locked up, because it makes them feel better about themselves and it makes them feel protected and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot that can be done, a lot that should be done, but do I think it will ever be done? I'm not sure. There was a lot of mental health treatment publicly funded and it all went away. The government cares more about building up sort of police forces and building up these things that are supposed to stop crime, but they actually statistically show that crime increases when you increase police. And people don't listen to that. I'm not sure why, but I think paying attention to prevention would be like the biggest thing. Helping people that are marginalized will actually help everyone in the long run. And that's my opinion.
I also wanted to mention too, I think the privatization of prisons is a huge problem. As Zoe said, you should not, there shouldn't be a profit for putting people in prison. I think the increase, and now that's not the majority of prisons, but there are privatized prisons that are for profit. And obviously there's ethical issues with that. And I think that needs to go away. And I think that would help some of the issues as well. As far as the the arraignment and the cash for bond and all that stuff. I don't necessarily agree fully. I do think it's unfair to put someone in jail, before they've had their opportunity in court. But on the other hand, you have to sort of weigh flight risk and, danger to society. I mean, there are some people who will not come back to court, who will flee the country and will never, face the charges that are brought against them. And, for victims, especially with domestic violence and things like that, a lot of these people live together. Where are they supposed to go? What are they supposed to do? And, they've just been arrested. They may be angry, that their partner or whoever has so there's a lot of things to consider with that. And I see your point, but I also think there's the other side to it where, there are some people that just, like serial killers, obviously that's the extreme example, or, child molesters, like while they're waiting, and it could be a while. I mean, our system, like we've discussed, is so backed up. They could be waiting for their day in court for a long time. And during that period, they could kill someone, rape someone, molest another child. And really that's, a known risk potentially. And now the person has not been convicted of the crime yet, but those are factors you also have to consider.
Yeah, I agree that there's definitely a balancing test, and you have to definitely consider things like that completely. My point is more so just that if you have, let's say, we were talking about murder. If there's somebody that was arrested for murder, and they get a bond of $250,000, if there's somebody who's indigent, doesn't have money, there's no way they're affording that. They're staying in jail for sure until their case goes to trial or until their case is resolved. But let's say you also have somebody who's accused of murder, who receives that same exact bond, $250,000, but he has money and he has resources. He's going to get out on bond. And so you have two people who their risk to flee the jurisdiction, maybe the rich guy even has the higher risk to flee the jurisdiction because he has the ability to do so in a way that he could get away with it. But you have two people who have, similar risk factors to will they come back? Will they commit another crime while they're out? Things like that. But the person who has money is able to get out just because he has money. So I agree. And that's why I say, it is tricky because it is hard. Sometimes when people get arrested, it is a heated situation and they do need to be taken out of the environment in which they were in. But I just feel personally that money shouldn't be the only thing keeping someone. So that's my point of view. But I completely agree.
Yeah. These answers were so thoughtful. Thank you, both of you. And as a prosecutor, would you say convictions are resume boosters?
No. I know that there is a perception of that. I should say in the vast majority of cases, no. There is that rare high profile case where, that may make your career. For example, the prosecutors who, just indicted Donald Trump, that may, yes, well, that boosts their resume when they go on and if they leave the office and they say, oh, I was the prosecutor on this famous case. Those are the very rare, few and far between. For the most part, especially in a busy office like the one I worked in, you're seeing all these cases nobody knows about. They're not resume boosters. And frankly, the office doesn't even care about convictions in terms of like, how many convictions did you have? You're not getting a raise. You're not getting a promotion based on your convictions. Usually the way that you make your reputation is by being, for the most part, a fair and honest and respected prosecutor who, there were times where I, refused to prosecute cases because I didn't think the police did their work. They didn't do the investigation properly. There wasn't probable cause to arrest. Those are the things that people respected, at least in my office. I can only speak for where I worked, which is probably a more liberal office than a lot of other places. It was New York. It's the Bronx. There's a ton of crime. And so we're very busy, and the type of people that, are hired in that office because the DA who is, elected, brought in all these people. And so his hiring process was for people that were a little bit, I think, maybe less conservative than some others, or less, had sort of a similar bent that he did on the criminal justice system and how the office functioned. And because of that, I think there can be, a completely different atmosphere in different offices, but I can only speak from my experience, and absolutely not No one was, when you won cases, people, and a win is basically when you put the right person in jail and do justice for the victim. That's what I considered a win. And did it matter to my office, like how many cases I won or lost? Absolutely not. It was not a resume booster. No one knew about 99% of the cases that I prosecuted. And so if I were to, put it on my resume, nobody ever asked me after I left the DA's office, well, how many convictions did you have? I mean, that's just not a thing that goes on. That's like a TV thing, people, that's like a Law and Order type, like that's just not happening. And really the way to build your resume is by your reputation and by being honest and fair and following the ethics rules and turning over exculpatory information and dismissing cases that don't deserve to be prosecuted and not putting cases in the grand jury that you can't ultimately think you can prove. And things of that nature is what builds your respect in your office, and therefore where you can go from there.
I appreciate Lisa's answer very much. I don't know if I'm the best suited to answer this question because I never worked in the prosecutor's office. So I'm not quite sure like internally how it works. I do know, as Lisa was saying at the Bronx office, that was similar, how she explained it is similar to the jurisdiction I practiced in when I was a public defender, because that's when I sort of had the most experience dealing with the prosecutor all the time. I was actually in Atlanta at the time when I was a public defender. So in my jurisdiction, which was pretty much the city of Atlanta, it's a more liberal place as well. And I know that their office, they didn't have quotas or anything like that. It was pretty much exactly how Lisa explained. If they had a case that they thought they could prosecute and they thought they should prosecute, they would go forward and try to get a conviction, or whatever the evidence uncovered, then that's sort of how they would deal with it. I do know that it's my understanding that there are some offices out there maybe that care about number of convictions or conviction rate when it comes to internal things such as promotions or things like that. I'm not quite sure about how it works because, as I said, I have no experience in that area. I will say that from my point of view, from a defense attorney's point of view, if I know a prosecutor gets a ton of convictions, I'm not going to really feel like any type of way about the situation. I think it depends how they get convictions. I think if there's a prosecutor who always goes to trial and always wins at trial, that's something that bolsters their resume, because if they're a great litigator, then that's something that really makes an impact on how I go into it, potentially in terms of negotiating, or if a prosecutor has a reputation of being a bad litigator, a bad trial attorney, then that has something to do with how I would go about things as well. So I think that convictions don't really, and like Lisa was saying, there's so many cases that fly by the desk of a prosecutor that there's really no way to keep up with their convictions. I think, the big cases, obviously you could know whether a prosecutor got a conviction on that case or not. But I think that that's more so something that is just one of these myths in the criminal justice system that prosecutors, I don't know, always want to get convictions or have to get convictions, things like that. I mean, I know many prosecutors who like convictions, regardless of whether it's just or fair. I know a lot of prosecutors like convictions, but I think that's more so because prosecutors and defense attorneys like to get cases off their desk. So a conviction is the end of a case for majority of cases. So that pretty much makes it so that the justice system keeps moving. One of the most important things in the justice system that people don't really know about until they get in the system is that the justice system cares most about efficiency and moving cases along. The correct outcome, the justice system as a whole doesn't really care about. They just care about moving cases. There's a reason for that because there's such a backlog and there's so many cases that we have to move cases. But I think that, a conviction is the end of a case, and that's sort of a win for a lot of people in the criminal justice system. So
I also will say, I know at my office, and I don't know if this was true at your office, the prosecutor's office you work, but we don't do what's called vertical prosecution. So, for example, one person will draft the complaint, another DA will be in arraignments, another person may do, all the pretrial hearings and all the discovery, and then the case may end up getting handed off for trial. So it's not like at least in my office, there was not one DA from beginning to end. We had a grand jury unit where like you just indicted cases and you didn't see them again. You handed them off after the indictment, or, you know, if you got a true bill, you handed it off. If it was dismissed, that was the end of the case, of course. But that case wasn't something that ultimately I was bringing to trial if it were to go to trial. So one, that's another means of checks and balances. So if you do have this rogue prosecutor that's just like diehard for convictions, it's not their case. There's a lot of hands touching that case along the way. And I think it was intentionally done that way to keep people, you know, from having, like, if there was a prosecutor with that mentality, they didn't have like no oversight. And it was like there were lots of different prosecutors involved up into the trial date. And so I think that helped things in that sense too. So when you talk about like, you know, winning cases, it's sort of a group effort. At least it was in my office, because you were not taking it from like cradle to grave, as they say. Like it was sort of like, you know, it would be passed around. And certain cases, you know, like the bigger cases, maybe like a murder case, you might have one very experienced prosecutor on the entire time, a very senior prosecutor, but they've been there their whole life. They're probably not leaving. And, you know, whether they get a conviction or not is really something like that. Of course, you would hope they have the ethics to do the right thing. But yeah, I mean, I think I know a lot of offices don't probably function that way, especially smaller offices. The Bronx is a very large DA's office, but that's how we ran things. So, you know, calling it like your case or your conviction isn't even necessarily like all yours. It's a bunch of people are involved in the process.
Great. This is a great conversation. And also, Zoe, I would like to give you the opportunity to lead on the next question, since I gave Lisa earlier. Should a person guilty of a crime have the opportunity to receive alternative sentencing options to prison?
Yes, 100% yes. I think that prison is not beneficial pretty much ever. I guess the whole point behind prison is that they can rehab people, but people do not go to prison and get rehabbed. There might be a few people that do, but for the most part, people go to prison and they get institutionalized. And when they're released, they end up committing another crime and going right back into the same institution that caused them to think a certain way in the first place. I think that going back to sort of what we were speaking about earlier, if we want to stop crime in this country, we need to focus on preventing it before it even happens. And I think that there's so many things that we can do as alternatives to prison that can actually reduce crime in this country. There's been sort of an increase in the trend in diversion, which is essentially, diversion is there are different programs for different situations. And if somebody's arrested, they can be diverted out of the criminal justice system into this diversion system. And oftentimes in diversion, they'll be required to complete courses, treatment. It depends on the crime. If there's, you know, domestic violence diversion, it would be like anger management classes or parenting classes, certain classes that people have to complete. And once you complete the diversion program, then your charges are dismissed and your arrest record can be sealed. And I think that's diversion programs are super beneficial. Not every time, but a lot of times when diversion is sort of an option, it's something I will push my clients to take, because it's a chance to not only have your charges dismissed, but also to learn a skill. Taking 8 or 12 hours of an anger management class is extremely beneficial and could really fix the problem that got this person there in the first place. Whereas sending them to prison for 2 years, they're probably going to come out with more anger management problems. I think that there's so many alternatives that we need to focus on, even things that are like house arrest or having an ankle monitor on or something like that. So somebody could still work and somebody could still be in society and still sort of grow as a person while the prison system or the justice system keeps an eye on them. I think that alternatives to prison should exist. I think that there's also a lot of research that shows that long prison sentences and sending people to prison do not have the effect that I guess lawmakers wanted it to have. I think a lot of times people think, okay, if we increase the punishment for this crime to, you know, life in prison, for example, if we increase it from 10 years in prison to life in prison, then more people are going to be persuaded not to commit that crime. there's research that shows that it doesn't have that effect. That some of these really long prison sentences and we want it to have this sort of effect to make people not do these things, that effect actually isn't there. And so I think that the prison system doesn't do anything to rehab people, and it in fact keeps people in the system. When you have things like turning someone into a felon, and now they can't really get an apartment, they can't get a job, they can't vote, they can't do all these things, you kind of back someone into a corner, and then we wonder why people commit crimes again. Because this person who you're not allowing to get a job or an apartment because he's a felon, he has 3 kids and a wife that he has to take care of, he has to do something to support his family, and you took away all the legal options. So I think that there's a lot that we can do that does not involve prison, and more so involves treatment, classes, education, actual things that can rehabilitate someone instead of just punish them. And that's, like I said, I think diversion programs are becoming more popular in many jurisdictions. And I think that hopefully with the growth of them and the expansion of them, that we'll see some changes. But prison is not the answer, unlike what many Americans think, in my opinion.
So I agree with you to an extent. I think for me, it's more on a case by case basis, because I think there are certain types of criminals, and I don't think they're the majority, but I do think there are some that really just cannot be rehabilitated and do not belong in society. Psychopaths, sociopaths, child molesters, like pedophiles, those people tend to reoffend. Once, and there's just certain crimes that I think, it's just from the victim's perspective, that's really the only thing that's justice for them. I do agree with you that alternative sentencing needs to be a part of the system for a lot of the crimes, property crimes, victimless crimes, drug crimes. We had drug court in the DA's office where you would get treatment and you had to graduate, and we would clap for them. It was like a whole thing. And it was great. I mean, you felt like you were actually helping these people, not just locking them away. And so I do agree. And the recidivism rate is so high in this country that it's proven, it shows that prison does not rehab people in any way. Maybe they find Jesus, or maybe they, get a new perspective. A lot of times it actually, just connects them with more criminals. And when they get out, they just they're more street savvy, and they know how to get away with more things. They understand the system better to commit their crimes better. So there's downsides to, locking people away with nothing to do, but basically learn how to become better criminals. They're not learning things. They're not learning a trade necessarily. They're coming out, as Zoe said, with, they've missed education, they've missed job opportunities. And now they're sort of like, what else can I do but sell drugs, commit crimes, whatever. And that is an issue. But I will say that I do think in some circumstances, prison is probably the only solution, because they can't be rehabilitated and are not fit to be in society, because their chance of them reoffending is just too great.
I also will add, just because Lisa, you just touched on this, I think if America doesn't want to take out sending people to prison, then there are certain things that can be changed about the prison system. And Lisa mentioned this with a little bit about education and stuff. I know there was a time when prisons had more things for people, more opportunities for people to learn trades, to get their college degrees, to do certain things like that. And so people could spend the time in prison actually building themselves up so that when they get out, they could have, a ground to stand on. But I know, at least in Georgia, where I used to work, the prisons used to have college professors come in and teach classes, and then they took the funding away. So that sort of ties into what I was saying earlier about people don't really care about criminals, and they don't realize that caring about them is what's going to make it so that crime will decrease. If the prison system actually had programs set in place for people to be rehabbed, it could potentially be better, but funding is just being taken from these things, and you're left with nothing.
And it's also a drain on society. I mean, putting people in prison is a drain on taxpayers. I mean, it's very expensive. People don't realize how expensive it is to put someone in prison and keep them there. I mean, it would be not that this should be necessarily the main factor, but a factor, that getting these people rehabilitated, getting them the help that they need, mental health, learning skills, education. I mean, that just benefits society in so many ways. And I know that some people don't agree with that. I'm well aware that there are some people that believe that the punitive approach is the best approach. And I do for certain crimes, but generally speaking, I think there are alternatives to just locking someone away would benefit in so many levels.
Great. That builds up onto our next question. So according to a Forbes article, 95% of Americans were polled to support the criminal justice reform. How do you think the Legal Advocacy and Education Commission can benefit from your current responsibilities? So thinking from your perspective, day to day, if you had more involvement with an association like us, helping the community, helping them, giving them alternatives, how will that change your outcomes or day to day in your current role?
I'm sorry, I don't really understand what you're asking. Like, can you ask that again?
Again, it was a long question. My apologies. So in our case, we are an emerging and innovative nonprofit, right? Which we are building the bridge between the justice system and the community in different manners. One of them is to provide them with opportunities, as both of you agree, instead of jumping to the conclusion of just sending any individual that comes through the system to jail, having them an opportunity to work with a life coach, have a safety assessment. So we make sure, to your point, Lisa, that it's a person that will be safe to come back to the community. So making sure that once we clear that out, provide an opportunity for them to work with a life coach, have goals for 5 years, and making sure that we have accountability with the justice system as well.
Mm-hmm.
On your day-to-day or current responsibilities, how would you say that LAC can have an impact on your angle of the justice system?
I mean, I think there's a lot of things at play, of course, because, there's so many things that affect the justice system, politics, like with legislation, with minimum mandatory sentencing. I mean, there are a lot of things that really just can't be changed with resources. I think some things can, and I think, I think there's a lack of resources on both sides. I mean, I know that the public defender's office is severely underfunded, and I think, they need funding. And I think that the, alternative sentencing and programs and things like that you're offering could really, help with that burden of just flooding the system, flooding the courtrooms, things like that. Despite what maybe this is just true in my office, the DA's office was not exactly like a glamorous place to work. My first desk had 3 legs in a box. I'm not joking. We had to bring our own phones. Like, we had, this was not like a glamorous place. When I left, I went to a big firm, and it was like a different world. So, I mean, it was not this, just like we had, resources compared to the defense bar. I think we had a lot of resources, but, everybody just is so overwhelmed, and like, you can't always give even a fair evaluation to what does this defendant need when you have such a volume of mental health might be an issue, this might be, and, even the victims, I mean, the victims need better services. I know there's victim services and things, but a lot of the victims don't even get really the attention that they need because of the volume. And to me, that's the biggest problem in our system right now. And I don't know how your agency is, what I love that you're doing what you're doing. And I just think like it's so difficult because there's so many factors involved. So it's kind of hard to answer that because there's just so many layers to it.
Yeah, I think that it is difficult to sort of think about changing a system that is so huge and set in place and just steamrolling down a mountain. I am a big supporter in education and talking to people about things, because public perception in my opinion, is so important. Speaking to people who don't really know about the criminal justice system and sort of educating them from my point of view is something that I love doing, because if I say something that, you know, one person finds interesting and then they pass it along to one person and then they pass it along to one person, it has sort of a butterfly effect. And I think that there's so many biases and sort of unconscious thinking in our society that people have just because of TV shows and because of, you know, the media. I think people have all these thoughts, and it's sort of, a lot of them are not based in reality. A lot of them are not based in actual statistics or crime rates or anything like that. And I think that educating people can have huge impacts. You know, a lot of people get their information from the media, whether that's on social networks, Twitter, Instagram, or TV, newspaper, anything like that. And the media has been really focused on crime and increasing crime rates and how crime is going up right now. And since COVID, there's just so much crime. And in all these cities, crime is spiking. But they don't tell the correct story, because there's a lot of other research that the media doesn't report about that shows that crime rates are not really increasing, and that those aren't fully the truth, and that a lot of these newspaper articles are only interviewing officers and only interviewing prosecutors, and the data isn't exactly, you know, always accurate. And I think that sometimes we just get blinded to these sort of agendas that the media has and that different people have when they put out information, and society just accepts that information and just moves forward with it. So I think that programs like this that just want to educate people, and especially educate them from both sides like this, is super, super, super important, because people need to know what's going on, and people need to sort of rethink things that we just have accepted without even thinking about them. And when you give people more information, you allow them to think critically about sort of what they're being told. And I think that it's really important. So the more people that can get educated, and educated by the right people. A lot of people have opinions on the criminal justice system, but they have no idea about the criminal justice system. They've never been in a courtroom. They've never read the law. They don't know what certain things are, and they have an opinion about it. I don't think those are the best people to be, you know, giving information to the public, to be honest. So I think that things like this that actually get people who know what they're talking about, and people who have experience talking about these things and like living these things, educating the public is really important, and just allows people to hear different sides of things.
Great. That's a beautiful closing. That's definitely something we encourage within LAC, which is bringing both sides and the human factor to both sides, and the willingness to improve, and the openness to have conversations, and finding alternative solutions within reason, of course. And I would like to close also by giving you the opportunity to give a brief about yourself to the audience. We left it to the end so they can get a sense for more of your thoughts and opinions. So feel free to, if you would like to do a quick introduction or about your office, so they know, where to learn more about the subject.
Sure. I'm Lisa Pyle. Thank you for attending today. It was a fun discussion. I started my career, I went to Fordham Law and started my career in the Bronx DA's office. I was there for a little over 3 years, prosecuted misdemeanors, went to the grand jury division, and then went to the rackets division, which is where you prosecute sort of more, corruption and things of that nature, with the intention of going to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And then ended up deciding I did not want to do that, and went to a law firm called McDermott and Emery in New York, a very large firm. Hated that, was there for a few years. And then now I live in Washington, D.C., and I've been working for the federal government as an in-house attorney for a criminal agency.
Thank you.
Very interesting, Lisa.
Yeah.
Cool. So my name is Zoe Aron. I obviously, as I mentioned, was a public defender. I went to school at Emory in Atlanta, and then I started my legal career in Atlanta as well. I worked in the public defender's office for a few years. When I was there, I did all types of things. I worked on misdemeanors, felonies. I spent a significant amount of time defending a lot of murders, and saw literally every crime under the sun. I loved my experience there. I thought it was so amazing, so just such a great introduction into really the system as a whole, and also just the ability to see everything and have so many opportunities to work on tons of different cases. If anyone is interested in becoming a defense attorney, I would strongly urge working at a public defender's office. I think public defenders get a bad name in the media and on TV for reasons that are completely out of their control. And I think a lot of public defenders are the best attorneys I've ever seen. They just don't have the resources and the time to litigate cases in the same way that somebody who has much less cases, much fewer cases on their desk can do so. So I thought my experience as a public defender was so great. I moved to Los Angeles. I returned back to California, where I'm originally from, and I opened up my own firm. So now I'm here as a attorney for hire. I've been here for a few months, not quite yet a year. So I'm still working on, getting my business up and running. And that's pretty much an introduction to me.
Well, thank you both. It was an honor to have you here, and also thank you for taking the opportunity to truly give us your point of view. I think this will be very, very valuable for all of our community and anybody that looks at at this event even further down. So thank you for attending, and wishing everybody a great weekend.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.